sermon this morning, the last word, and it's found in John chapter 11, verses 1 through 44. So as you're turning there with me in your Bibles, I wanted to share this the story that I found. It's a true story, and I wonder how much this really happens. I don't know. But it says that during the 1978 firemen's strike in England, that the British Army took over emergency firefighting. Can you imagine that? I can't imagine what that would be like. There's nothing you can replace your firefighters with. So on January the 14th, they were called out by an elderly lady in southern London to retrieve her cat, and they arrived with haste. They were very cleverly and carefully working out their duties, and so they removed the cat. And as they started to drive away, the lady stopped them and invited them for a cup of tea. So as they stayed and enjoyed their time together with her, then they left. And it says, driving off later, amidst their fond farewells and warm waving of arms, they ran over and killed the cat.
Oh my goodness.
Can you imagine that? My first thought was, well, sometimes the best of intentions still ends in failure, right? You know, have you ever been there before, though? Sometimes you've had the best of intentions, and they've ended not quite the way that you wanted them to be. You know, maybe you've gotten up early in the morning, especially early in the morning, because you had an important event that day you needed to be to. You know, and you've left in plenty of time to get there. But what happens with sometimes the best of our intentions, what happens is what usually happens, right? There's a traffic jam. There's a wreck that keeps you from getting where you need to be, or some crazy thing has happened, and despite our best laid plans, we still end up failing in what we wanted to do. Have you been there before? Yes. Right? We all have. We all have experienced moments like these. And I promise you we're going to continue to do so, right? So the question isn't whether we will have these moments or not. The question is what will we do when we face them, right? So today in our scripture text, which by the way is one of my favorites in the Bible, is we're going to see Mary and Martha. They are the sisters of Lazarus. They have a plan. They've got a plan. Everything is going to work out just the way that they want, or so they think. All they need is for Jesus to do something that they want, but he doesn't. And their plan ends in failure. Or does it? The point that I want to draw out from this text today is really simple, and it's this, is that when you learn to trust Jesus, even in the midst of our failures, in the midst of chaos and confusion, you will see and experience things you've never seen before. So I'm not going to read the text today. It's lengthy, and we're all familiar with the story of Lazarus, so we'll just invite us to go to prayer before the Lord before we dive into the text. So please pray with me. Lord, we thank you for the text we have today, Father. We're all familiar with Lazarus and the great power that Jesus demonstrated when he called him from the grave. And Father, we sometimes become so wrapped up in that we miss some of the other finer nuances that are there. And Lord, I pray today that we can draw out some of those things, Lord, some of the things that you want us to see that are there, Lord, that we haven't seen. And I just pray that you will open our minds to this, Father, our eyes so we can see, and our ears so we can hear, our minds so we can understand, but then our hearts, Father, to apply it to our lives. And I pray as we do so, may we just grow a step closer to you. Father, it's been a busy week for many of us, a lot of trials coming up next week, and business next week. And I pray you will remove those things, those thoughts from our mind, and help us to focus solely on your word this morning, Father, and what you're trying to teach us. Grant us clarity, Father, Lord. Help us to see what you want us to see. And for myself, I pray, help me to not try to be in control of this, Father, but be led by you to say the things that I need to say and should say. I pray that you'll take control of the service, Father, that your Spirit will be present here amongst us, and may great things be done for your name's sake. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The 3 points I want to draw out this morning, my friend has them up on the screen, is point number 1, the plan. Point number 2 is the pain. Then point number 3 is the final word. So we know what a plan is, don't we? We're all familiar with making plans. We know what the process of making a plan is. For instance, when we go on vacations and you have kids, right, you plan all that you can. You get ready to hit the road. You packed up everything, and you get in the car, and your thought is what? The kids will be fine, right? Sometimes we think, they don't need to stop and use the bathroom that much. Or certainly they won't be that hungry along the way. I'm speaking from my own experience. It may be different for yours, but you know what I'm talking about. You know, if you've ever been there before, you know what I'm talking about, and that this line of thinking, as good as it is, typically does not work out. You see, Mary and Martha, they had a plan. And we see that in the first 16 verses of this text today. I'm not going to read them because we're familiar with it. But we know that they have a plan. And what's happening here in these verses is that Lazarus, their brother, is sick. In fact, he's sick to the point of death. And so they sent Jesus a message. We don't know if they sent him a letter, how it got to him, but Jesus got this message, and the message said this: Lord, he whom you love is ill. Now, when I read that, the first thing that popped in my mind is this, well, they didn't address it to Jesus, did they? They didn't say, Jesus, he whom you love is ill. They said what? They said, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Now, to me, that's significant. That's one of those little contextual clues that help you understand where Mary and Martha were at in their faith. They believed in Jesus as the Messiah. They trusted in the words that he was saying. But here's where it gets tricky in their plan, mind you. They didn't ask Jesus to come and heal Lazarus. They expected him to come when he was called. So that was part of their plan. Now let's stop right there for a minute and think on that. They expected Jesus to come and do something that they had planned out for him. Now, and how many times do we do the same? How many times do we have an expectation of Jesus that might be considered unfair? How many times do we have our own plans for Jesus? Is it because we know that he can do anything, and so sometimes we act like he's a genie in a bottle? And so all we got to do is just rub the lamp and he pops up and say, hey, Jesus, we want you to do this. And that he will somehow go along with our plan. And to top it off, we expect him to know what our plan is in the first place. Well, he does, but we expect him to be in alignment with that. Or maybe sometimes we have an expectation of Jesus because, we don't pray that he does things according to his will. We're hoping that he ultimately does it according to ours. How many times have we been there? I've been there. Well, we all been there. That's part of our human nature. It's our plan, so therefore it must be right, and we expect Jesus to go along with it. How many times have we been there? Quite a lot. I'm guilty of the same. If someone said, I'm pointing 3 fingers back to me, just as much as I'm pointing one out there to you guys. We're all guilty of this. We pray for God's will to be done, when in fact, all we really want is for ours to be done. So are these unfair expectations of Jesus? Well, they are. So Mary and Martha's plan was for Jesus to know that they wanted him to come and for him to heal Lazarus. But what happened? Well, verses 4 through 6 says this: But when Jesus heard it, the message that they sent to him, he said this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. And then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. Let us go to Judea again. Well, if you didn't follow along with us on Sundays, you know the significance of that statement, because just in the previous chapter, we found out that the Jews did not like Jesus because of the things that he was saying, and they were wanting to stone him. So here it is. Jesus says, let's go back. And that's a statement, honestly, that someone who just avoided death, his disciples avoided death and not being stoned as well, they don't really want to hear. Can you imagine that? Let's go back. It's like jumping into a pool filled with man-eating alligators, and you swim across the surface, and you make it to the other side, and you get out and you say, whew, man, I'm glad I survived. And Jesus says, jump back in. Who wants to hear that? Nobody. But Jesus does that sometimes, doesn't he? Is it easy? No, it's not. But what's the difference? What's the difference when Jesus asks you to do it versus somebody else? Well, I'll tell you the difference. It's in verses 9 through 10. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, it's rather simple. What it means is it's the difference that I just mentioned. When you walk in the daytime, you have the S-U-N to guide you, right? We have the sun in the sky to give us light. But when you walk with Jesus, you have the S-O-N to guide you. Jesus says if you don't, you walk in the night. You will stumble and you will fall. So when you are walking with Jesus, what need then you have to be afraid? You should have none, right? You should have none. He, as he says, is the true light of this world. So he says to the disciples, let's go back. Why does he want to go back? Well, because he says Lazarus is asleep. And Jesus needs to wake him up. You may say, yeah, he's asleep. You know, someone needs to set that alarm for Lazarus. Now, just about anyone's going to say, if you're sick, the best medicine is for rest and sleep. Those are the best things to help you get feeling better. And it's no different here. The disciples, when they heard Jesus say that, they believed that he's really asleep and Jesus just needs to wake him up. But what does Jesus say? Jesus says to them, Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Jesus says he's dead. And not only that, but Jesus is glad that he wasn't there so that what could happen? Something very important. So that they could believe. The Gospel of John is always about these incidences in people's lives where Jesus performed miracles, and again it's referred to these things are done so that you may believe. Jesus is talking to his disciples here. He's also referring to us. So do you think that Jesus has ulterior motives for the things that he allows to happen in your life? Do you think that when you have a wreck that keeps you from getting somewhere, that he has an ulterior motive in keeping you from getting where you wanted to be in the first place? Very likely so. And now you know why Jesus doesn't go to Bethany right away. Because Jesus, being God, if Jesus would have been there, what would have Jesus done in Bethany? He would have healed him. He would have taken the sickness away. Jesus says, I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you may believe. And if he would have gone, they would have missed the miracle he was about to do. They would have missed out on God's plan. So can we understand what Jesus is doing in our lives? And if I were to ask you, say, Iris, do you understand what Jesus is doing in your life? And someday you'd probably be like, yeah, and others would be like, I thought I knew yesterday, today I don't. Bruce is shaking his head. That I've been there before, right? You know what I'm talking about. We have a hard time understanding sometimes what God is doing in our lives, but we can trust that he's up to bigger plans, far greater than ours. And yet, in the middle of it all, we think we still have him figured out in some way. You know, sometimes we're like, man, I've got Jesus figured out. And then we say, I don't know what he's doing. That's a contradiction, isn't it? Look what Thomas says here in verse 16. Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Remember what I talked about earlier? They were expecting that they were going to die in Judea should they ever go back. So Thomas, who was unaware of the big picture and thinking he knows what Jesus is talking about, says, let's go die with him. Was that what Jesus was talking about? No, he was talking about a bigger plan. As we'll see in a little bit. That leads to point number 2. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said this, into every life a little rain must fall. Have you heard that before? In every life a little rain must fall. And that's true. Not every day can be bright and sunny and filled with butterflies and daisies, with nothing but good things. You know, we all will experience pain. We all will have bad things that we will experience, and we won't like them. Now let's consider Mary and Martha again. By the time Jesus and his disciples arrived, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. Talk about timing, right? You know, Jesus is late for anything. He's late for something that's significant for them. Remember their plan. Jesus purposely stayed behind so that Lazarus would die. Did he do so because he was wanting to be vindictive? No. Because Jesus said God had a plan. Do you remember what Mary and Martha's plan was? He's going to come and heal him and take care of everything. That's not what happened. And you see, Lazarus, he's been dead for 4 days, so there was no doubt that he was dead. I mean, you can sit there and stare at the body for 4 days and it's not moved, and he's starting to stink a little bit. They even mention something to Jesus when he wants to move the stone away. They say, Lord, if you do so, he's going to stink. He's been dead 4 days. So they know he's dead. And also by this time, there's a crowd of mourners who showed up. Everybody from church has shown up. They're comforting Mary and Martha. They're patting them on the back. They're there for them. Look at verses 20 to 22 with me. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming in the midst of all of this, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. And Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, remember her plan? If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give it to you. So we understand that there's pain there. That Martha is upset. She's upset because her plan didn't work out. It failed. She called Jesus, which revealed her deep trust in him and confidence in him as the Messiah, because she knew that he could heal Lazarus. She knew that he would, but Jesus didn't make it there on time. Now, can you imagine what Martha would have said had Jesus said, well, I just waited around for a few days? She would have been even more upset, right? But we don't need to worry about that because we know that God had a plan, she had a plan, but what does she still do? She still believes. She says, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give it you. So even though my plan failed, you can do anything, I'm just waiting on you, is what she says. And that's God, right? He can do anything. And that's what having faith in God is all about. To say what Martha did is to express a faith that believes beyond what the finite mind can understand. It expresses a faith that says, I believe, and you really mean it. You say to God, I believe. It expresses a belief that despite the circumstances, you believe that God can do anything, even if he chooses not to. As hard as that is, that's faith. And what does Jesus say? Does he immediately snap his fingers and Lazarus hops up and moves the stone himself and comes out of the grave? No. Does he make a grand show in some other way? Does he sit down and gather a crowd around him? Does he have a Bible study with him? Does Jesus do any of those things? No. What does Jesus do? What does he say? Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Verse 24 tells us that Mary understood the teachings of the Old Testament, that life isn't about everything. Everything's not about life. She knows that the grave is not the end, but that's not what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. I want to be crystal clear here with that. Jesus doesn't say that he can resurrect people and that he has life. That's not what he's saying here. He says that I am resurrection and I am life. And what that means is simply this: that our hope as a Christian is not in an upcoming event, it's in a person. Jesus can give life because he is life. We have life, but we can lose ours. It's appointed for man once to die, and after this the judgment. The Bible says that we will die, but Jesus is life. He cannot lose his life unless he gives it up freely, and that's what he did for us on the cross. And when he died on the cross, when he willingly laid his life down on the cross for you and I so that we could be saved, he did so willingly. He gave his life for us willingly. No man can take it from him. But then after he died, he was resurrected to prove that death had no hold on him. And if you believe in Jesus, it doesn't have a hold on you either. That's the promise he gives in verse 26. Now, those who believe in him have a future to look forward to. That's the power of the gospel. That's the power of God. That's a wonderful hope to have, isn't it? When you have your faith placed in Jesus and nothing else, you have a future. You have a hope. But what about Mary? What about Mary? Martha goes and gets her, and she tells Jesus the same thing when she comes out there. It's almost like they rehearsed it. When she sees Jesus, she tells him the exact same thing. And what does Jesus do? He does what Paul tells us as Christians are to do for each other. In Romans 12:15, Paul says this: we are to rejoice with those who rejoice, and we are to weep with those who weep. We are to meet them in their needs. You know, the shortest verse in all of the Bible is found right here. Do you know what it is? 2 words. Jesus wept. You know, Jesus wept not because he was unable to do something. We know that. God could do anything he wanted. To the contrary, Jesus was about to do something tremendous, and he knew it, but yet he wept. That verse carries a lot of significance. It carries a lot of depth. You see, and I believe, and so do many commentators, that Jesus wept because he was experiencing humanity. He was experiencing what it meant to lose a loved one to the tortures of death. And I'll take it a step further. I'll take it a step, and this is not in the Bible, and it's in the commentary, so take it for what it's worth, but I'll take it a step further. I would say that Jesus wept because he knew it didn't have to be that way. Because when you go back to the beginning, when you go back to Adam and Eve, he gave them a choice. They could either obey God or they could disobey. And the Bible says that when they disobeyed, sin entered the world, and what came with it? Death. It didn't have to be that way, but it was because we chose death. Mankind's greatest failure is that we brought death into the world. Which leads to the final word, point number 3. You know, you remember when you were a child growing up? So for some of us, it's a longer time to think back to. You know what I'm talking about. We remember that we would get into arguments with our brothers or our sisters or our friends, and what would we always want to try to do? We want to win, right? We wanted to win those arguments. And what typically, even if you couldn't win the argument, what did you want to have the final, you wanted to have the final word, didn't you? Because if you could get that final word in there, man, you were golden. Whether you really were or not, you just be like, yeah, I got it in there. You know, you can't say anything to me. Well, you know, husbands and wives do the same things. When we argue with one another, when we are fighting with one another, we start offering up comparisons, don't we? If a man can say, well, at least I don't do this, what's he really saying to his wife? He said, I'm trying to win. I'm trying to compare what I do with someone else, most likely someone that she knows, or related to her, and he's saying, well, at least I'm not as bad as that. He is trying to one-up them. And when it comes to relationships, and Tate Copper talked about this for our marriage conference, he said the best thing you can say at the end of an argument is, I'm sorry. Right? It needs to stop right there.
Amen.
Why? Because true power comes in humility. Now what about death? What about death? Does death have the final word? Does death have the final word? Think about it. What is the one thing that mankind fears more than anything else, and we have tried to overcome ever since the dawn of time? Death. The final act, the sudden end. Like my pastor friend told me growing up, he goes, I don't necessarily fear death, I fear the process of dying. That's what we're afraid of. We don't know what it's going to be like on the other side. We've not been there yet, right? We've not read the memoirs of someone who died and went to the other side, and hey, I'm still in heaven, I just send this book back to you. We don't know what it's like. But death doesn't have the final word thanks to Jesus. And that is epitomized here through Lazarus. Jesus comes up to the tomb, and he commands that the stone be taken away. He stands out from the crowd. I can see him kind of stepping up on this little rock outcropping maybe. And Jesus says, take the stone away. And of course, you know, Martha and Mary are like, no, don't do that. He's going to stink. Right? But then Jesus prays to the Father so that everyone can hear. And this is what he says in his prayer. He says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around who are listening, that they may believe that you sent me. Then, after saying these things, our Bible say that Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And what happened? He did. Grave clothes and all. He's wrapped up. He's probably popping out like this. You know, Lazarus comes out of the grave. And you see, Jesus couldn't just say, come out or come forth, because if he did, everybody in that tomb would have come out. He had to be specific. He had to call Lazarus by name, but the end result is still the same. Jesus proved that he had power over death. So does death have a final word in our lives? It doesn't have to. But if you don't have Jesus, it does. That's a scary reality, isn't it? But I wanted to stop and think on one thing here at the end, and it's this. What about Jesus? You know, we've looked at this. We understand that Jesus has the final word over death. He's defeated death in the grave. But what about Jesus? Jesus' word is the final word. That's because his word is power. And what does Jesus' word say about himself? That's a random question, isn't it? What does Jesus say about himself? Well, we read it a few minutes ago, didn't we? What did he say? He said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Jesus' last word here in this text is that death is going to be defeated because Jesus is alive. What is Jesus' final word to us here today? Is that death has already been defeated. And it was defeated at the cross. It was defeated through his death, burial, and resurrection. So that is why Jesus can stand up in the Gospel of Matthew right before he goes back to heaven, and he can give the Great Commission, which says this, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you to the end, always to the end of the age. You see, Jesus says, all authority has been given to me because his time of humiliation is over. He's now exalted as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's won the battle. He's beat death. And he gives us a job to do. And then Jesus says in the book of Revelation, chapter 22:12, he goes, behold, I come quickly. And my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. Jesus says, what? You know, sometimes we forget about that book of Revelation at the end, don't we? Because it's so hard to understand sometimes. But this is really clear. What does Jesus say? He says, I'm coming quickly. And my reward, I'm bringing a reward that I'm going to give to people based off of what they've done. And we understand today that Jesus has the last word in our lives then. We understand that. He's got the last word over death. He's got the last word in our lives. He says in Revelation, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In fact, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 55. He says, O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Indeed, where is it? It's gone. Why? Because of Jesus. You see, I don't think that God ever intended for man to die, but when sin entered the world, then death came too. Man's greatest failure was that disobedience to God brought death. Not God, it brought death. Man did that. And there isn't a health plan in this world that will keep death from coming. There's no premium that you can pay to keep death from coming. We all will face death one day. So in other words, we're all going to fail. Death is going to come for each and every one of us unless Jesus comes back first. And so we must look to him who has both the resurrection and the life because he's got the final word. It's that simple. So in closing, I want to ask this question. This is a promise today. Can you claim it? That for you, death has lost its sting and therefore its victory. Can you claim that? Can you say beyond the shadow of a doubt that you would know that if you were to die here, going on home, if you're driving out to Fayetteville and you were to die in a car wreck, do you know that if you were to die, could you open your eyes and be in the presence of Jesus? Can you claim that kind of faith? Can you claim the kind of faith that Martha and Mary had? Because I promise you, it's no laughing matter. It's not. It's not something to put on the back burner and think about later because, believe you me, I know how that works. You say, I'll get to that later, and what happens? You never do. It stays there. Things left for later hardly ever get done. And it's like I told someone once who was contemplating salvation. I said, I ask the hard questions as a pastor because if you wait until you stand before God for him to ask you, it's too late. You've got to consider these questions. So again, can you claim this promise? If not, then this time of invitation that's coming is for you. To get the assurance that you need. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians 6:2, today is the day of salvation, and it can be yours if you want it. Or maybe you believe you've forgotten about Jesus' word in Revelation that he's coming quickly. About how he's bringing his reward with him. What are you going to do if you're not ready? What if Jesus comes back on your way home today and you're not ready? Well, I'll tell you one thing that's going to happen. You're going to miss out. So if that's you, you need to reorient your priorities back to the Lord, then this time the invitation is coming is for you as well. So if you would please bow your heads and close your eyes, and as our musicians getting ready to come and play a soft tune on the piano, whatever they have planned for us today, I just want you to consider these two questions. Can I claim this promise? Can I claim the promise that death has lost its sting and death has lost its victory because I found it in Christ? And if you can, then praise God. I'm praising him with you, and I'm rejoicing with you. Because we have a home, we have a hope to look forward to. But if you cannot claim this promise, understanding that Jesus has the final word in your life, that there is nothing else you can do except come to Christ through him, come to God through him. Today is your day for salvation if you want it. But the other question is this, have I lost sight of the fact that Jesus is coming quickly and he's bringing something for us? He's bringing a reward that's for us. And what have I done in light of that? I don't know about you, but I don't want to stand before my Maker and say, oh, I just never got that. That's not going to work. And if that's you and you want to make that prayer in your seat, that's fine. That's between you and the Lord. I encourage you to do so. I'm praying with you. If you want to know about salvation and how you can be saved beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'm here up front at the end of every service. You can come and talk with me, and that's why I stay up front, because I don't want to miss that opportunity. You know where I'm at. I'm not flitting around the church anywhere. I'm right here until most everybody leaves. And the same is true if you have just a prayer request or a need you want to share. I'll be glad to pray with you also in that. Because today is the day. Don't wait until tomorrow. You may not have it. Lord, we lift these things up to you, Father, knowing that Jesus says your word goes forth and it will not come back void. It will accomplish that which you want it to do. Your word is power. It's not me that has power. It's not my voice that has power. Of all things, it's pretty weak today because of the allergies that are out there. But Father, your word has power. And when you open the Bible and you read what's there, it strikes a chord in all of us to the truth that is there. So I pray today, Father, that your word will do what you want it to do. And may it change hearts and lives. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.